Hey class, this week we're going to talk about the design process, structural design. Successful design begins with understanding the assignment thoroughly. The design process, a series of interlocking stages, begins with the structural and functional design that moves decorative design with intervening stages of critique. The designer uses the design elements as tools to create the looks and the design principles as guides to evaluate their work. So, the start of the assignment for the designer begins with a project brief. This 5-step brief provides them with full detail and a deadline by which their project is due. So number one is to analyze, or step one, I should say, is to analyze the assignment. So are they creating looks for children, women, misses? What type of garment is going to be created? Price points are considered, etc. Step two is to look for inspiration. So reference fashion forecasting materials, WWD, social media. Step three is to be sure that the project parameters are clear. So clarify any issues such as any styling differences based upon geographics, like urban versus suburban. Step four is to consider the design principle unity. So the degree of unity to complexity. So for a designer, their target audience will indicate this tolerance. So depending on the audience, some may be more open to complexity versus unity. Step five is to use the design elements to generate design ideas. So the designer should stay open-minded and let the ideas flow. They should not become boxed in. They should always want to explore all ideas as something outstanding can be created from them. The tools that are used. Designers use two different tools, design elements and design principles. So the same set of tools are utilized by all designers. However, they may apply them to different tasks. So for example, an interior designer would apply these tools to the rooms within a home and the contents within. An architect would apply these rules to the structure. So design elements include line, shape, and or form, space, color, texture, and pattern. Your design principles are proportion, balance, rhythm, emphasis, and unity. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into all of these tools as we progress through this week's lecture. I know we previously had a brief discussion about them as well, but we'll get a little bit more in depth to hopefully expand your understanding. So stages. All decisions within the design process are connected. The process is completed in stages. However, reversal to the prior stage can occur at any given time. So stage one is the structural and functional design. Um, Designers create a silhouette using design elements. Again, those elements are line, shape and or form, space, color, texture, and pattern. They establish fit and considered how the garment will be put on and taken off in stage one. Stage two is going to be the aesthetics, so the look of the garment. So using design principles as a comparison tool, designers are able to assess the structural and functional design of the garment. Stage three is decorative design. So designers use design elements to reinforce and or enhance the structural design. And then stage four is appeal. So evaluating the success of a garment. for a design. So how appealing is it to the target audience? So here's a more detailed look at these stages. The silhouette. So styling a garment begins with visualizing the total look. So how does the garment look from all angles? The front, the back, and the sides. So there are three design elements: shape, form, and space. So shape is two-dimensional. It's more of a flat space, and it can be enclosed by a real or imaginary line. Form is three-dimensional, and space is the area within or around a shape or form. So within space, you have ease. So ease is defined as the space between the body and the garment. So there's two types of ease. You have wearing ease, which is the required space needed for a person to be able to function when wearing the garment. So for example, when you put on the garment, can you walk? Can you breathe? And can you bend? Then there's also the designer's ease, which is the space that designers build into garments to produce a stylish silhouette. So that could be volume, or it could be a garment that has a lot of body hugging. So these images represent ease. So on the left, you have more of the body hugging, but on the right, you have more of the volume, the added in ease that the designer has implemented in their garments. Seams, darts, and edges, working with line. So as a reminder, line represents an imaginary edge or an actual garment component. So since fabric is two-dimensional, it must be shaped by seams and darts into a soft sculpture that relates to the human body. As an element of design, a line will lead the viewer's eye through a space. It'll also divide a space as it passes through it, and it can enclose a space. Lines have the potential of unlimited variations, but it's easier to classify them into types of variations. So within structural design, you have the line direction, line length, and its path. So with line direction, the eye is led through the garment, and the line direction can also convey a meaning. So vertical lines add height, while your horizontal lines add width. Your diagonal lines are going to be more exciting and dramatic. For line length, long lines will smooth and extend and stretches by accentuating its direction. A short line is going to break space into smaller segments, giving a feeling of activity and disorder. Line length is classified as long or short depending on the surrounding components. Paths, which are either straight or curved lines, can be simple or complex. A simple straight line is the template for an angle, a zigzag, or a more irregular jagged line. A curved line can be slight like a bateau neckline or deep and rounded like a scoop neckline. So our society considers straight lines to be masculine and curved lines to be feminine. Working with space. So a designer controls the relationship between positive and negative space. So positive space is referred to the inside of a shape, while negative space is referred to the area around the shape. The inside of a shape, which again is called positive space, is called that because it is bounded by the line. The line essentially creates the boundary. Now, the area of the shape, which is again called negative space, is called such because it is unbounded. If you look at the image here, you will notice that the positive space, which is considered the garment, and then you'll notice how within that positive space, you have the negative space, which is the neckline openings. Proportion. So proportion compares distance, sizes, and quantities. It is guided by the golden ratio. However, this book refers to it as the golden mean. So equal division is the least interesting. But division that follows the golden ratio is intriguing, it pleases the eye, and relates best to human proportions. Very unequal divisions are also interesting, but they are still not as interesting as those that follow the golden ratio. Now, designers evaluate proportion by comparing the relationship either between the part to the whole, as in comparing the skirt, which would be a part, to the dress, which is a whole, or within one part, as in comparing the division of a bodice into three parts, or amongst parts, as in comparing the width of the sleeves to the width of the shoulder and the hem. Balance. So the goal of visual balance is equilibrium, a feeling of evenly distributed weight. Designers must deal with symmetrical and asymmetrical balance when deciding on silhouette, seams, edges, openings, and details such as pocket and trim placement. So things that are symmetrical have similar components on both sides of the center line. A good reference point of symmetrical balance would be the human body. So if you're facing the human body head on and you split it directly down the middle, you're going to have the same parts on either side of the front of the body or on the back of the body. However, if you look at the body from the side view, or from a side profile, I should say, the front is different from the back. So while the human body is symmetrical when you look at it from the front based upon the center line, it does have a little bit of asymmetrical balance as well if you look at it from a side profile. So with asymmetrical balance, the parts are not the same. So asymmetrical balance is complicated, it is challenging to understand, and it is dynamic. However, when you have that symmetrical balance, it's visually simple and it's easy to understand and static. The feeling of equilibrium depends on the perception of visual weight. So again, here we're still talking about balance when we're talking about equilibrium. So when you think about it, something that is black appears to be way heavier than something that is white or of a lighter color. Things that are white and are of a lighter color seem to be lighter. Also, when you think about fuzzy textures, they appear more massive and large rather than when you compare something that is a smooth texture. So within a garment, a designer can have more than one kind of balance. They can, in fact, have two or more different kinds of balance within a single garment. So let's take a look here at symmetrical balance and asymmetrical balance. So we're going to look at it from the perspective of using the human body as an example, and then we will look at it from the perspective of a garment that is on the human body. So when we look at the picture on the left, we have a young lady showing her body here. And so when you look at her straight on, you can see the symmetrical balance, right? She has two legs, she has two arms, she has two eyes. You can see the symmetry there. But when you look at a side profile of a young lady here, you see that it is asymmetrical, right? So when you're looking at her front is different from the back, right? She has protrusions in certain areas in the front that she doesn't have in those same areas in the back. Now, when you look at the image on the right and you're looking at symmetry on a garment, you will see that the image on the left, the dress is very symmetrical. It's the same on both sides. It looks exactly the same if you split it down the middle on both sides. Think of it as taking a half of something and then mirroring the image. So if you've ever used like design software, you can literally design half of a piece and you can mirror the other side and put the two together. So that's basically how your symmetrical balance is. It's really just like a split image of one side of the garment. With your asymmetrical balance, you will see the design emphasis on the at the waistline there. And then you also see the design element on the left shoulder there, or the right shoulder, I'm sorry, of the model there. So you can see how it's asymmetrical, and you can also see how that creates a dynamic image to look at. So it's very interesting to look at this asymmetrical balance. It can be confusing as well, but it's definitely interesting, and it appeals to my eye more than symmetrical balance a little bit with this particular design here. So if it were me, I would probably go with the asymmetrical dress to wear out on an evening. So with balance, you also have what is considered radial balance. So this is where it spins out from a center point, the balance does. So the center acts as the anchor, connecting and balancing the edges of the design. So when you look at this image here, you can see the center point. And can you identify where that center point is and where it anchors and branches off? So you should have recognized that it is in the center of the garment, more at the waistline. It's almost like it's pretty much a center point with like rays spreading through the garment. Now, rhythm can increase unity or cause confusion depending on how different parts are used. So it is important to be cautious when incorporating visual rhythm, since the technique is directional in nature and it changes the perception of the body size. So your rhythm can be part of a structured design, or it can be purely decorative. So visual rhythm implies movement. It provides an invitation to follow a repeating arrangement of line, shape, color, and texture. So within visual rhythm, you have pace. And pace is a sense of speed caused by the number of objects and the space between them. Uh, Visual rhythm also increases unity and it grabs the viewer's attention. So, repetition is the most common form of visual rhythm, and repetition can occur naturally or it can be created. Repetition guides the eye through the design. So, an example of repetition would be like collars, pockets, pants legs. Um, Repetition also can be created by repeating a motif at least once. Rhythmic variations. So, parallelism are rows or columns in which all points remain the same distance apart. They never come together. So, it creates arrangements that are directional. Many parallel rows can weaken the directional effect, though. But when you have less parallel rows, it will strengthen the directional effect. So, alternation is when two motifs are swapped back and forth in a series. So, it's more impactful when the eye can easily distinguish between the two motifs when using alteration or alternation. Sequence implies a purpose. So, motifs are presented in a particular order for a reason. It is more often seen in decorative design. Gradation is when a motif changes step by step in a recognizable progression. So it's very similar to sequence, but it involves several stages when the motif morphs into another related one. So, an example of gradation would be color progressing from light to dark down the length of a garment. So, almost think of like a gradient. And radiation is the repetition that spreads out along lines extending from a central point. So it's used to feature desirable characteristics of the garment and the body. An example of radiation would be a sunburst or the geometry of a daisy. So the center point, when you think about it, draws attention, and then the eye moves outward along the rays of a sunburst, or in the same respect with the daisy. You'll kind of start from the center, and your eye will move outward and look at the petals of the daisy. So this effect is particularly strong if the center is visible and more subtle than it is if the center is merely implied. Emphasis attracts the viewer's eye and directs its movement throughout the design. So it does play an important role when flattering the wearer by putting attention on desirable features and underplaying less desirable features. With the center of interest, also called the focal point, the designer determines the placement, how to make it important, and what other features are secondary. A single strong focal point adds to the feeling of unity, whereas multiple or even conflicting focal points add to complexity. So, the most frequently used techniques to create a focal point include contrast, so placements of opposites next to each other. Now, absolute contrast occurs when two entities have nothing in common, which may create confusion for the person viewing the garment or the image. Moderate contrast adds interest and variety. Isolation is the separation of the focal point from any competing effects. So the dilemma is using isolation to achieve emphasis without creating a spotty design where the motif looks just like added in or thrown onto the garment with no rhyme or reason. Concentric shapes are shapes of different sizes that share a center point. So they bring emphasis to the center, and placement of the center must be carefully considered. So when talking about isolation, again, an example of that would be an applique as the only accent on a coat collar, which leads the eye to it and to the face of the wearer.